Before I get started, I just want to introduce myself quickly. I'm Courtney Barks. I'm an addictions counselor with Alberta Health Services. I work primarily with youth. I've been doing that for about almost the last 10 years. I work usually in schools, and historically my work has been focused mostly around drugs and alcohol addictions. So doing this tonight is a little bit different for me. I haven't done a lot of presentations on this because this is still fairly new for us. I chose to focus mainly on video games for addiction pieces because that's what we're seeing a lot more of. But I also want to tie in some pieces to just screen addiction in general. I know I have heard from parents, from kids themselves that, you know, my child or I just won't get off that phone, whether it's on the social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, all those ones that Chris was talking about, saying that are really popular. And I'm going to throw my son under the bus as well. I've got a 12-year-old son, and he's on the iPod all the time. I have to fight to get him off. So the addiction piece, it's not necessarily that it's a really common thing, but it's up and coming. It's something that we're seeing a little bit more about. And I'm glad to hear what Chris had to say in his presentation about relationships and accountability and those conversations. What I have learned through my own research on this topic is that a lot of the pieces in dealing with it, from my perspective as an addictions counselor, is very similar to that of drugs and alcohol. We need to have those connections with the kids. It's something we need to talk about. It's there. It's not something that we can run away from. And that's often what I talk to parents about too in terms of the drugs and alcohol piece. You know, we can shelter them all we want, but there's going to be some level of exposure. And the exposure to this is just, it's insane. And it's something that we don't know what to do as parents. And me, myself, as a parent, I don't know what to do. I don't have all the answers. And I'm the first to admit that I don't want to learn. I don't care to learn. I'm not interested in technology. I'm not interested in anything online, but I have to be. I have to be. So that's a very important piece. We have to be engaged with our kids. So I know I only have a quick 20 minutes, and I am known for not getting through my presentation, so I'm going to do my best to make sure I get through all the slides. So just to quickly touch on this, and Chris did as well in his presentation, that this is the first generation to have lived their entire lives with the internet. You know, a lot of the young kids that you have, that I have, their whole life, they've had access to the internet. So this is very different. In 2000, there was no wireless users. In 2010, I hope these stats are correct, 70% plus using wireless connections. So now we're at 2017. You know, what are we looking at now? Everything, this access is instantaneous. It's there. It's all the time, right? There's no more dial-up. There's no more waiting for things. It's there. And quick, easy, low effort makes it very desirable, right? Again, they don't have to wait for anything. And kids like things quick. They like it now. They like it low effort, and probably even some of us as adults as well, right? So when it's there, it's in our face, it's quick, it's easy. It's easy for those routines and those habits to start, which is where I come in, is when does that become more problematic? When does it become an addiction, as we might say? What does that look like? So what's happening, again, just to quickly go through some of this, there's many types of games, including the massively multiplayer online role-playing games. It's the MMORPG, first-person shooter, real-time strategy. There's all kinds of games out there that these young people are playing and getting involved in. And they're spending a lot of time on these games versus, or even just online, versus that one-on-one relationship piece. And that's, again, where I come in and where I get more concerned about is that we're losing on some of those one-to-one interactions with each other, those face-to-face interactions, right? What are they doing when they're sitting there in front of a screen, whether it's a video game, whether it's social media? What are they potentially losing out on when they're not having those face-to-face interactions? Okay. How much are Canadians playing? A lot. It's kind of the summary of this. They're playing a lot. And one thing that's come out some of the research that I've found is that most female users are using a mobile device to play games, and the males are using more console devices, which I don't know, it didn't really come as a huge surprise to me. Why this is, I'm not 100% sure, but we can probably make some assumptions about that, but definitely wasn't completely surprising for me. This is another one that I thought was interesting. It's something that I'm seeing more, and I'm sure you guys are as well, just in day-to-day interactions with other people, is that there is a huge rise in use of cell phones, right, for the games. Everybody was on there playing Candy Crush, or whatever else the other games were. But then, and it stayed fairly level around the computer and the game console, but there was a huge rise, and that's when we've seen a huge shift in concern over how much time these young people are spending on their phones, right? Gaming and its relationship to all of these pieces. Boredom, procrastination, those pieces are huge, and some things that I'm seeing as well, just even as a parent, right, is it's just something to do. I'm bored, there's nothing else to do. Why aren't we going outside more often? Why aren't we engaging with our kids more often? It's become that quick, easy, low effort, and I'm getting some gain with it. And again, that's where creating some habits, some routines, potentially bordering on that addiction piece is coming into play. Overstimulation is another one that I hear a lot of. I hear a lot of, well, is it going to cause ADHD, right? And well, the answer to that is there's some research on it, though we don't have definite answers on that. What we do know is that potentially some kids that are struggling with attentional issues or concentration issues maybe are drawn more to some of these games. There's so much going on in them. There's things flashing. There are, whether it's different games that they are connected with other people on. They're doing tasks, they're doing missions, they're watching a bunch of different things. So it really can be something that these kids are drawn to. Does it cause something like ADHD? Well, I'm not going to go as far as to say that it causes it, but what we do know is that it does touch on some pieces in the brain where it can impact memory and concentration. So it's not necessarily completely risk-free, and depending on the level of exposure. How much are these kids playing? They're playing hours and hours and hours, and that's some things that we have definite concerns about, is that what is that impact on the brain? And as an addictions counselor, I also have those concerns with drugs and alcohol. What is repeated exposure doing to these young kids' developing brains? Isolation. How many kids are sitting by themselves playing these games, right? Again, the lack of face-to-face interaction is what really concerns me. Now, on the other hand, I've had some people say to me, well, what about those kids that really struggle socially? And they get online, and they meet all of these people online all over the world, and they play these games with them, and they get that feeling of satisfaction, and they get that feeling of connection. Well, that's something else to consider too, right? There's no black and white answer to this. It's really going to be a balancing act. But what kind of games are they playing? What kind of interactions are they having? Those are all some things to take into consideration. Violence is another huge one. Again, that repeated exposure. What level of games are they playing? How are they rated? Those are some other things to take a look at. If they are playing for hours and hours and hours and hours, does any of that, do they take on any of those behaviors? Do they start to believe things? Do they, it's that social learning model theory. Does it become a learned behavior? Now, there have been some studies on that and some research and some brain scans, and there's definitely a lot of research to be done yet, but they're looking at that correlation for sure. Okay, continue. Who's at risk? There's a lot of kids at risk. Anytime I look at addiction, I look at protective factors and I look at risk factors. And they both involve the individual themselves, the community, their family, their friends. So some of the things that these online games, or even social media, what does it give them? What is it their purpose, their reasons for engaging in that behavior? And that's where we're really going to find more of our answers to who's at risk. Looking at addiction, I think it's kind of the same across the board. Historically, I've looked at drugs and alcohol, as I've mentioned, but these behavioral addictions are just as concerning because they're using or engaging in these behaviors for the very same reasons, right? Whether they want that sense of belonging, that sense of connection, that sense of engaging socially, that sense of having some sort of success. Like, look at some of these online games where they have to put a lot of energy and effort into these missions or these tasks, and they have people relying on them. And when they succeed, they feel phenomenal. So my big question is, where are these kids having success in other areas of their lives? Are we ensuring that they have success? Do we know if they're falling somewhere, if they're not feeling successful, if they're feeling low? Are we there to pick them up? And that's part of that connection piece that is so important for us to have with our kids. Do we know what's going on in their lives? We don't want this to fill the gap, right? And as we look at addictions too, we look at how big of a thing is this? Well, it's being considered in the DSM as a disorder, and again, looking at addiction. I don't know if you'd be able to necessarily decipher between a drug and alcohol addiction, gambling addiction, gaming addiction. They're very, very similar criteria. So it definitely is becoming something serious. And even looking in the brain, there are impacts in the brain, right? It's a reward system. These pathways are being entrenched in the brain the more that you do it. So it's the same whether it's these what we call process addictions and they're behavioral versus drugs and alcohol. So that same piece is there, that same criteria is there, and the same things are happening in the brain. They're getting a reward out of this. They're getting pleasure. They're getting, they're having reasons for using it. It can become a habit, a ritual, a routine, and that's something else that we see in addiction, right? They start maybe dropping off other areas of importance to them, whether that be school, whether that be engaging in face-to-face interactions, whether that be their chores, whether that be their other responsibilities, engaging in family activities, things like that. When those things start dropping off the map, that's when we really start to get concerned and we discuss what is problematic here, what kind of needs is it fulfilling, and the same with even social media pieces. When they're on there, right, what need is that feeding for these kids? How come they're on there all the time? So that's something we need to look at too. Is it all bad? You know, I come out here and I don't want to sound like I'm putting the fear in you guys that it's all bad. It's not all bad. You know, is it a way to engage with other people for maybe those kids that do struggle socially? Can it be a positive outlet for them? Can they feel success when they haven't felt success in other places before? Absolutely. Absolutely. But is there a balance, right? That's the piece that we have to look at to ensure that there is a balance and that these games, the social media pieces aren't what's feeding them, right? Is not filling a void. So some points to consider. The extent to which technology can either narrow or expand the ways in which teens interact with their friends in the wider world. So again, it can be a positive thing, it can be a negative thing, but we have to stay engaged, right? We have to stay engaged with these kids. And again, those other things that I have outlined before, those factors that can contribute to addiction, the connections, the interest, the self-esteem, how are they feeling about themselves? And that is where it's our job to get in there and to talk to them, to ask them, to give them other interests. And gaming is normal. Social media has become a norm. Right? It's not something that we need to run and hide the computers, take them away, put all these bans on them. It's not going away. It's here to stay, but we have to find out a way to make it work for us. We need to try and find a way to create a balance, right? And that is the key. Talking to your kids is the key. Having that healthy, trusting relationship with them is key. Finding out what do they like about it, what are they getting out of it. What is important to them about it? All of those pieces, that's what's important for us to be doing with our kids. It's not swiping everything away and saying, no more of this, no more of that, right? finding a balance is what it's all about. Again, paying attention to the payoff and whether there are ways to encourage this in other activities, right? Getting them to feel success in other activities, getting them to use their mind in other ways. There's tons of other things that we can be doing, right? Let's engage in that. And me as a parent too, as I said in the beginning, I don't want to learn. I really don't. It's not something I care about, but I have to, and I have to be involved, and it does take energy, and it does take effort, and I know that we want to do that for our kids, right? So again, kind of those key things are paying attention to what they're involved in, why they're involved in it, and looking at the moderation. That is definitely, I guess, the common underlying factor in any addiction is why are they doing it, how often are they doing it, and what are some other things that are being put at risk in order for them to continue engaging in that behavior. So it really just comes down to paying attention, be involved. It's not going away. It is normal. It is part of our lives, and it's not something that we have to be scared of. It's just knowing what to do with it, where to go, who to ask. If you do have more questions about this, I will be around for the rest of the night, so please feel free to come find me, ask any questions, or give us a call, and that's it. Thank you so much. I think I'm on time, 7:45. Very good. Thank you.